All right, welcome to the Cart Barn with Chris Limley and Gregg DeWalt. We have a lot of golf to get to today with an exciting guest that I'm sure you're going to enjoy. So let's get to it. Welcome to the Cart Barn podcast, where we talk about golf and everything golf in Alabama. I'm Chris Limley, joined by my co-host, Gregg DeWalt. Gregg, how's it going?
Going good, Chris. How's everything in your part of the world?
Well, it's been dry. We need some rain, and not playing as much golf as I'd like to. The weather's getting nicer, so I hope to start changing that a little bit.
Yeah,
But you, on the other hand, have been playing some golf.
I have. I spent a week recently at the Myrtle Beach World Am tournament. Me and 2,970 other of my closest friends converged on Myrtle Beach for a tournament that's been going on for 41 years now, and it was quite the experience.
Is that the first time you've played in that?
It is. I have a friend who some courses up in Myrtle Beach, and he's been after me to come over and play in it. This year, since I'm semi-retired, I had an open week in late August instead of covering football. So it was good. It's really interesting. Like I said, 2,971 players this year, 45 from Alabama, which kind of shocked me at how many Alabamians were there.
Nice.
And they play 55 courses. There were 60 flights, 55 courses, the world's largest 19th hole every night. It's quite the endeavor, and they do a super job with it.
Very nice. What courses? How many courses and what courses did you play?
I played TPC Myrtle Beach, which kicked my butt the first day. Then Brunswick Plantation, the International, and Pine Hills at Myrtlewood Country Club. The rotation was pretty good. TPC was the best of the bunch. A lot of it's like old school Southern courses, tight, tree line, lots of water. But they use just about there's about 85, 90 courses in what they call the Grand Strand along the coast, and they use most of them, spread it out. Again, there were 49 players in my flight number 22 for mid seniors, and our handicaps were basically between 6 and 7. So it was an interesting event. I had a great time. Managed a late charge to finish 5th in my flight, which
Very good.
won me a $50 PGA Superstore gift card.
Very nice. Well, that's good. Well, congratulations and good playing. Well,
It was well worth going over there. The room I stayed in overlooked the Atlantic Ocean, which is a little different from the Gulf, which everybody knows the Gulf. So seeing the Atlantic Ocean was a little different. So it was good.
well, good. Well, we'll kind of jump into this week's podcast. It's our very first episode, and we didn't want to ease into this thing, so we decided to come in hot. Our first guest, I'm sure you'll enjoy, the always popular and one of the nicest guys in professional golf, Stewart Cink.
I've known Stewart since 1988 when he was a freshman at Bradshaw High School up here in Florence. And I was, when I was hired as a sports writer at Times Daily, everybody knew I'd played golf at UNA, like you had played golf at UNA. And everybody was telling me about this phenom golfer kid at Bradshaw High School. And, I was like, okay, yeah, another phenom. Every town in America has got a can't miss kid in some sport or another, but nobody realizes how hard it is to really make it in any professional sport. So I reserved my judgment on Stewart. Turns out I probably shouldn't have, because he has definitely lived up to his expectations and
He
more.
has.
Just, to go over the highlights of his career: 8-time winner on the PGA Tour, including one major championship when he broke everybody who liked Tom Watson's heart in the 2009 Open Championship. I think people in Florence might have been the only people in the country rooting for Stewart that day, and even then it was kind of divided. Because he ruined a very good story. With I think Watson was 59 when he was trying to win. But anyway, he's on 5 Ryder Cup teams. He played on 4 President's Cup teams. I was a vice captain last year on the losing Ryder Cup team. I would remind him of that. This year he's a co-captain or assistant captain on the President's Cup. And recently he picked up his first senior tour championship, which
Yeah, that was fantastic.
I think it might have. I think it was a year later than it probably should have, because he's played well on the Champions Tour, but he hadn't broken through until the Ally Challenge up in Michigan.
Yeah, he has played well. A very limited schedule, but I think he's maybe looking at increasing that now, and I think that's I think
One thing I found interesting, I think he's one of only 22 people to have won on the Corn Ferry Tour, the PGA Tour, and now the Seniors Tour. And to take it back even a little bit further, he's won in junior golf, he won in college golf. So unless he goes plays on the DP World Tour, I think that's the last bastion where he hasn't won on.
yeah,
So we're excited to have him on as our
absolutely,
inaugural guest for the Cart Barn.
absolutely. Well, we're excited to have him. I've known Stewart since he was around 13 or 14 years old out at Florence Country Club. He's always been a super nice guy and a phenomenal player. And without further ado, let's get into this week's podcast with Stewart Cink. All right, welcome back to the Cart Barn. Today we're joined by Stewart Cink. Stewart, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Nice to be on.
You didn't call me and let me know you were a co-captain of the President's Cup like you did with the Ryder Cup, by the way.
That's correct. I didn't. I thought that was probably old news.
Well, it's good to have you on, Stuart. So why don't we just kind of jump on into this? Growing up at Florence Country Club, a lot of people think country club, they think, hoity-toity, highfalutin. Florence Country Club was definitely not that. It was like a working class country club, and you were in the middle of all of it, working in for Chris Byrne. So, what was it like growing up at Florence Country Club, and like when did you start playing with the old guys and taking their money?
Well, I started playing with one old guy when we moved to Florence before I was old enough to play on the course legally. I was born in Huntsville. We moved over to Florence when I was about 5 or 6, and my parents played golf. I had just seen that, and I had a couple of clubs or whatever. I don't remember if I actually played on a golf course before we moved to Florence or not, but I know on Mondays we used to go out to the Florence Country Club and play. The way the course was arranged, you could play part of number 1 and then 2, 3, 16, 17, 18 and make a big circle around the outside of the course. And my dad would walk those 6 holes with me. And I just remember thinking that was the greatest thing, get to play on a real course. You weren't allowed to play till you were 8. And so that's the only kind of exposure I got to golf. I could go to the practice green, and at Florence Country Club, the term practice green and practice facility are one and the same, because that's all we had. That was our practice facility, was the practice green. It was a putting green. It was right down below the clubhouse, kind of sandwiched in between number 10 green or number 10 tee and the clubhouse. That was it. That was the practice facility. So I could go out there and do whatever I wanted to there, but I couldn't go in the course until I was 8. So that was, over 2 years of just golf, just practice green golf, other than the occasional 6-hole stretch around with my dad. So that's kind of how it got started for me. I love beating it around, and there was some element of like, maybe I can beat my dad on the hole one day. And my dad was an okay golfer. He's probably I'm guessing he was like a high single digit, maybe like a 6 or 7 was his best he ever reached. But to me, as a little kid that age, I was like, wow, man, number 2 was like 110-yard par 3. And I remember just begging for my dad to let me hit a 5-iron on that hole. And he was like, that's not enough club. And he finally said, yeah, you can hit the 5-iron today. And I hit it, and it came from the front bunker, 110 yards. And I'm like, I can't reach it with a 5-iron. I was devastated. But those were great memories. And then, as I turned 8, when I was allowed to play, I had already become pretty proficient at getting the ball in the hole around the green, because I had the practice facility right there teaching me everything I needed to know. So I was all right. By the time I was 8, I could just get it up near the green, and I was like up and down. It took me a long time to play tee to green. It didn't take me very long around the green. And so I was already like, okay. And, I was shooting in the 40s, and I was a golfer by that point. And when I started playing, I guess by the time I was old enough to legally play at on the weekends, where I think you had to be like 14 before you could play on the weekend mornings.
Mm.
Details are fuzzy, but at that point, the better golfers in the club all played in this group at around 10 o'clock on Saturday every week, and um, I started playing with them because they were the best players, and I knew them all. It was probably a little rowdier bunch than my parents would have loved for me to be hanging around, because there was money changing hands a little bit. It wasn't like a big gambling group, but they were called the Gamblers. If that tips you off any at the style of play. So the Gamblers teed off at 10, and I played with them, and it was kind of like a team match, and you had a little individual thing going, and I just learned how to play and shoot scores and make birdies, and most importantly, hit it close on the par threes, because that's where all the money was, and I could put food on the table and save up some money. I mean, it was just an awesome place. The best part about it was the people were awesome. Chris Burns, the pro out there, was legend. But the club just mirrored the town so great. It was the Florence Country Club. That's exactly what it was. It was called that. There wasn't a more perfectly named country club in the world, because that club mirrored the town. It was blue collar, not too many fancy folks, very good people, having fun. The course was okay. Not, wasn't the best course any of us ever played, but it taught us a lot, and it gave us sort of a home base and almost like a true north when it came to playing golf in the kind of world you need to be in that golf can create, and that's just mostly good-hearted people.
What
Yeah.
did you kind of learn? I mean, playing with the older guys. I mean, when I started playing with my dad's group, I was the snot-nosed kid. I would take some money, and they would, the snot-nosed kid won. What did you kind of learn from playing with those older guys? Business, they were businessmen. Worked at Occidental. What were the
Mhm.
lessons from that kind of shaped you, if any?
Well, first of all, I don't think I can remember one thing that any of those guys did as far as their jobs, because it's just something I don't know if we talked about it, or if I didn't care about it, or I just forgot, or what, but I don't remember one occupation out there. And I know they all worked. And these guys, to me, they were the old guys. They were 30 to 45 mostly. It's not they had another group, the retirees that played, that was later. That I didn't play in that group. I played with what I call the old guys that were like 30 to 45 years old. And I don't remember one thing about their jobs. So, and by the time I started playing with them, by the time I was 14, like for instance, I was a club champion when I was 14. So it's not like I was trying to learn how to play golf from them. I was already probably maybe the top player, or the top 3 or 4 players for sure. I was just looking for somebody to play golf with that was like, competitive and fun, and they were going to make some birdies, and we could like hoot and holler a little bit on the course. But where I did learn some lessons is when we had rain delays, because when the golfers couldn't play golf, they played this little weird card game called Back Alley Spades down in the basement. And occasionally I got drawn into that. And that's where I got taught a few lessons. That the golf was lucrative. The cards were not lucrative for me at all. So I didn't spend a lot of time around the card table.
That's funny.
Florence Country it was like 6,000 yards from the tips, right?
Yep. Maybe not even that.
Then how did your game evolve when you would go play a course that was 6,600 yards?
Yeah. That's a great question. I ask myself that all the time. And there's a couple of courses around Atlanta where I live now that are very short by our standards, but it's basically the same thing. You still have to drive it straight, and you still have to hit your short shots close, and you still have to putt if you want to shoot low. And that doesn't really matter course to course. It's always the same. You definitely get tested with your long irons more at a huge course like Pinehurst #2 or something like that. Of course you do. But in the end, really, even the courses that test your long irons are still going to test your wedges and short game more, because on a 500-yard par 4, if you miss the fairway, you're going to have like a 70-yard third shot most likely. And that just, it adds a shot, because at Florence Country Club, you rarely had that long shot out of the rough where you had to lay up short of the green. But you had a lot of 70-yard wedge shots, uneven lies, tiny greens. It just taught you how to score. And, it taught me about places where you didn't want to hit your ball. I didn't have a yardage book. We didn't have a rangefinder. We just used these 150-yard bushes out there in the fairway I always thought that was an interesting way to mark the yardage, just these enormous bushes. I don't even know if we got relief from them or not. They were right on the side of the fairway, huge things. But we didn't know our yardages. We just played by feel mostly, and I'm sure there were probably times when we hit what we thought was a perfect shot, and we're like, that is like a lot longer than I thought, or a lot shorter than I thought. But it just taught you how to deal with some of the little adversities and uneven lies. The turf wasn't perfectly manicured. It was pretty good, but there was definitely spots that were kind of bare, and there was some off type grasses out there here and there. Temporary greens. It's like we had two courses. I mean, we had 36 out there. Half the year we were on temporaries, and we weren't just like cutting circles in the fairway. We had temporary greens built that we switched over to. So it was just a lot of different factors that contributed to like developing skill sets. You had to drive it straight. The fairways, a lot of them, the course was built on about 67 acres. So if you know much about golf, like the expanse that a golf course is built on, 18 holes in 67 acres is pretty tiny. And it was crammed in, and it was on the side of a slope, like really steep. And most of the holes ran across it. So almost every fairway sloped pretty hard left or right. So it wasn't just narrow, but you had to kind of like curve it into the hill. We didn't have the sprinklers going all night long, so the turf was pretty hard usually, and you didn't want your ball to get away into the lower trees. That was mostly the theme on the holes, is you had to keep it from rolling downhill, and you had to kind of like work these little curves into the hills, and it just taught you how to do stuff that golf requires all over the place. And looking back, it was a pretty good place to learn how.
Absolutely.
I think Chris Burns, he could be a little gruff, and it took me a while to really kind of understand his nuances. But kids seem to flock to him. I mean, if there was a person in the state that had a bigger junior program during those days, I don't know of one. And what was it about Chris that made it work and made these kids want to come out there and learn and get better?
Yeah, what Chris he was pretty gruff, but he was also really warm. So it's a combination you don't see in people that often. A lot of times, gruff and cold kind of go together. But Chris Burns was not a cold man, especially towards kids and golf. He really was warm, and I think that warmth is what came through all the gruff layers, and it seemed to resonate with kids like me that were like, I just want to be around Chris because he loves golf. And when we were little, when we were 8, 9, 10 years old, like he could hit it 10 miles, and we were watching him hit. And I remember one awesome story from Chris when I played in the Pro Junior. He was telling us about this wacky situation where he always thought that if your ball's plugged in the bunker, that the best way to hit a good shot was to pull the flag out because the ball had a chance of hopping in the hole. And I was just like, I mean, it sounds like just so outlandish. Like he's just making this up. And we were playing in Dothan in the Pro Junior at the same course where the Future Masters still is. And Chris Burns plugged it in the bunker on a par 3. And he knew he had told all us that story about taking the flag out. And he's like, get that flag out. Take that flag out. We got the flag out, and son of a gun, hold that bunker shot. And it bounced right in, just like he said. Just like he said. I mean, you couldn't have duplicated that with 200 golf balls. And he did it in tournament. So he was just that kind of guy. He liked to, he was passionate about golf. He just loved sharing it with people. And even looking back, I don't really have any idea if he really knew that much about like playing golf and competing. I honestly don't remember if I ever saw him shoot under 70. I don't know. I don't care. All I know is he was really warm to us. He really was passionate about golf and about us playing well and getting the basics right. And he had a good way of teaching where it was just very simple and very monotonous and even to this day, I wouldn't say I do a lot of the drills I learned from Chris, but my coaches that work with me, we do very monotonous drills the same way every day for 5 minutes, not like 2 hours every 7 days, but 5 minutes a day just to get things like the setup and the grip and the weight transfer and things like that. Just, it's very monotonous, but Chris was teaching that way when I was 8 years old. And I think a lot of that's what drew kids like me to his program.
When did you start working for Chris?
What was the legal age you could work and get paid money to do labor in the state of Alabama? Was it 16? I'd say if it was 16, I probably started when I was 14. There was some laws violated. I'm not going to lie. There was some laws violated. I think I started working out there when I was 14, and I'd say probably legally you're allowed to work at 14 or 15. Don't really know. I don't think that was a big factor. There was a couple of months early on when I was working out there where there was a cash payment involved and no check. And I probably owe some back taxes on some of that, some of the $12 paychecks I got when I was 14. But it was good Chris knew, I guess, like a lot of the families at that club, it wasn't like we were flush with cash. And so I love being around the club. I was already out there anyway. And I kind of knew my way around the carts and all that. So I didn't have to do a lot of onboarding. And I just ended up working out there. I don't even remember the first time that Chris asked me if I'd want to do it. I just, thinking back to my teenage years, I just remember working at the club for Chris and, handling the carts and getting the members' bags and being a little mischievous, like me and Chad and our other buddy David Morris, who worked out there. Just a little bit of mischief here and there. We weren't great employees, but we were pretty good employees.
I remember when I was playing golf at UNA and would come out there, and I remember there's a story about a snake and a golf cart that was around the time of one of the Florence Country Club invitationals. You want to tell that little story?
Yeah. Well, all the snake in the golf cart, that it all, once, like any employee in any place, once you realized that there was tips available, that became your sole focus in life. And there was plenty of times when we didn't charge the carts properly or didn't, replace the water in the battery because we were just like hyper focused on getting tips. And by the way, Chris, no offense to you and the college players, but we knew you weren't getting anything from a college player, so we let y'all get your own damn bags. So we learned the ropes pretty fast. And so during the busier parts of especially weekends when the crowd was showing up, usually Chad and David and myself would basically be positioned in a cart waiting for the next sign of a windshield to come over the hump out there by number one, because we were going to be the first one to get that car. And, you pull up behind the car, open the trunk, get the bag out. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. And it was polite. We knew everybody out there. So, put them on the bag. And you knew you could expect somewhere between, I think I probably received as little as a quarter for a tip and as much as $5 for a tip. I don't think I ever received more than $5. Not in actual hard currency. There was a few times I probably received some things that were worth more than $5 that might have resembled like coolers with leftover what was left of a 12 pack or something, but you didn't hear that from me. But usually we were after that tip. And so that particular day, the snake day, I was in a cart, Chad was in a cart next to me, and a car pulls up. And we kind of had this hierarchy where I knew that I was next for this car. And so every now and then, you'd be the next guy and a car would pull up and you'd take off and go meet it. And it'd be like the electrician coming out there to take care of a job, and you'd miss out because you don't get a mulligan on your turn. Well, on this one, I took off and it happened to be like, I wish I could remember who it was, but I know it was a car that was like, this is the person you want to get on Saturday morning because it's probably going to be $5. I took off. I went about 30 feet, and all of a sudden my cart just explosion is a little too strong of a word, but it stopped, and there was like smoke pouring out of the seat right underneath me. And I jumped out and opened underneath where the cart batteries are under the seat. And there was about 4-foot snake that had crawled up in the batteries and kind of wound its way across. And he ended up basically making a connection between the battery terminals and fried himself while I was driving the car. And I'm looking especially at this, and I'm like, Chad, and I couldn't even get out of my mouth before Chad flew by me to go to that car, right through the smoke, to go to that car and get that golf bag and get that $5. That was our world. That was our world. We had dates. We had put gas in the car. that was it, man. We wanted to get that tip, and we did a good job for the members too. We weren't just like only only hoping for tips. We were only hoping for tips, but we knew we had to do a good job for that. But yeah, the snake fried himself, and then we had some fun with that snake, that carcass of the snake, over the next day or two before it just got too stinky and raunchy, scaring people and stuff.
How many
Great
times
story.
did Chris threaten to fire you?
Probably about a dozen times threatened to, and only one time I actually thought it was going to happen. And that was there was occasionally some racing involved with the carts where we would just try to outdo each other. And they had cut they put a row of cedar trees along the back of the parking lot, like you would put to shield like your house from your neighbor's house, like a screening. And then right through the center of it, they left one spot open where it was a good little path for us to walk down to the cart barn. I think, come to think of it, they replaced the cart barn during the time I was working there. So this was the new cart barn. And the cart path went around the trees. And so one time we were going down to get carts, and we would always go down in the morning. First thing we'd do is we'd just make runs. We'd go down there, grab one, and ring it up and get it ready. Walk back down there and just bring them up and get them staged. And this particular morning, we were staging the carts, and Mr. Burns had gotten us these walkie-talkies that were kind of, because he was tired of not being able to keep up with us, because we were fixated on tips, and we were out the parking lot, and he needed something inside. Well, he didn't want to get up out from behind the counter and walk outside and say, "Hey, Chad, hey, Stewart, come in here." He wanted to call us, so we had walkie-talkies. Well, me and Chad were staging the carts, and I'm sure David Morris probably was there too, because on the weekends there was usually three of us. The three of us were we would kind of see who could win the race coming back up, and the cart path just wasn't wide enough for two carts. So whoever in this moment, I think I was the one that got just ahead, and Chad decided he was going to drive his cart up through the little cut in the cedar trees and walk and in the walkway, and it didn't quite fit. It was just like a little too big to make it through, and it got kind of hung up on the cedar limbs, and he was still determined to make it go through. Well, at that time, right at that exact moment, Chris Burns had walked out of the golf shop to come and get our attention because we weren't answering the walkie-talkies. And so Chad drives up through the bushes only to like pull out onto the pavement with all the debris flying everywhere. And Chris is standing there like 20 feet in front of him, just going like, "I don't know what I'm going to do right now with you guys. You guys are," and he ranted for a few minutes, and I thought that was it. I don't know how we survived that. We were probably 17. I don't know how we survived it, but somehow we did.
That's
I
like,
think he knew everything we were up to, everything. And he knew that, it's like any parent, you kind of, the kid doesn't ever think that the parent knows, and then the parent always knows everything. Well, I remember Chris kind of pulling me aside and telling me, like I'd gotten in, not Chad, but certainly not Chad, but I'd gotten into a group of kids who were kind of like headed the wrong direction. And I was kind of headed the wrong direction a little bit, not awful, but I remember Chris Burns got a hold of me and kind of said, "Hey, you're headed the wrong direction. I just want you to know that, you got a good thing going. You need to like clean it up." Something that like my parents never said. I think my parents probably knew some of the things that we were getting into and probably just turned the other cheek because they were maybe a little bit in denial, like kind of like I was as a parent. I don't know. But Chris didn't shy away from it. This was the gruffness of him coming out. He cared so much that he felt like it's my place to say something. And he did. I don't think he discussed it with my parents. I just think he just knew what was going on and said, "Hey, you need to straighten it out." And it had nothing to do with what kind of employee I was. I mean, I think he was fine with me and Chad, David, being sort of goof offs. But he just knew that when I was not at work, when I was out on the town or whatever, or on the weekends, that he knew I was getting into some things. And so he actually, it resonated with me. And I'm not going to say that I cleaned everything up right when Chris said that, but it always hung with me, that someone cared enough to say something like that.
That I think we should quantify it now that Chad is Chad Parker, who turned out okay too in his life. He's like, is he the president or director of golf at East Lake in Atlanta?
Yeah, he's whatever you want to call the head honcho. He's he's at East Lake Golf Club over here in Atlanta, where they have the Tour Championship every year. Chad He started there in the mid 90s as an assistant pro and just worked his way up through the golf shop and then into the administration. And now he runs it. He's the top guy. It's awesome. He's been my best friend since we were, since the Florence Country Club days when I was like 8 years old. He's about a year older than me.
How crazy is it that two guys from tiny Florence Country Club, the working class country club, end up, one of them on the PGA Tour and the other in his position at one of the most prestigious clubs in the country?
And even more so, both of us affiliated with Eastlake too, because Chad graduated from college a year before me, did his little rotations where he worked for clubs to get some experience and build a resume, and then got offered this job at Eastlake. I'm going to guess it was around 1996. And in 1995, I graduate from college and I'm turning pro. And the guy who was then the Chad Parker of Eastlake, the guy who runs everything, they had just done a big renovation. And he approached me and said, "Hey, we are the home of Bobby Jones, Georgia Tech guy. And we would really like a young pro from Georgia Tech to sort of like be Eastlake's representative out there in the pros. And we think you're the perfect guy." I'd had a good college career, and we played at Eastlake a lot when I was in college. And then Eastlake became this new, it became the Eastlake we know today.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost over, 1 summer of renovation, it just like became this amazing place again. And it came from a rundown situation. And so Jim Gerber was his name. He approached me and said, "We'd like you to be our guy representing Eastlake." So basically, me and Chad both started at Eastlake at the same time. He was working in the golf professional side of things, and I was working down at the range and using it as my practice area and basing myself out of Eastlake to go and play in tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we kind of came back together almost at the same time within a year or so.
That's crazy.
Yeah, small world.
Story.
Really is. You mentioned Georgia Tech. As I remember covering you, did it come down to you going to either Stanford or Georgia Tech? Were those the two main?
Yeah, and Auburn. Auburn was in there too. It was a three-way decision for me, and I really liked the other two. I had a good relationship with Puggy Blackman, who was my coach at Georgia Tech. Also, at the time, it was Mike Griffin coaching Auburn golf, and I had a great relationship with him because he recruited so many Alabama tournaments, and I'd known him since I was a little kid. They had the SECs at Turtle Point for I don't know which years it was, but for about 6 years, and I went to all those, and I remember just watching guys like launch it over the right bunker on one, just like, wow. I mean, that is just like astonishing. They can hit over that bunker. I can now hit a 3-iron over that bunker. So, and things have changed a little bit, but I just remember watching those players and just meeting the coaches. And I mean, I think a lot of coaches kind of had heard like from somebody around town, like, "Watch out for that guy. He's good. You're going to know his name one day." I was 11, whatever, but Mike Griffin was a friend. And I remember being on my recruiting trip at Stanford. Nota Begay was my host, and Tiger Woods had just committed to go there. And so basically any recruit that came to Stanford, all they had to do was say, "You're going to be on Tiger Woods' team." And that was basically the extent of their effort to try to get you to come there. But in addition to that, I mean, Stanford, Palo Alto is pretty amazing. But I remember laying out one night under the stars with Nota Begay. Many people may not know Nota's name anymore, but he played golf on the tour for a long time. He is a Native American. He's Navajo. Just a great guy. Awesome. One of Tiger Woods' greatest friends. And he's also a good friend of mine. But 2 a.m, laying out there looking up at the stars, and I was just thinking, like, I think I'm on another star right now. I mean, Palo Alto felt about as far away from Florence, Alabama as I could have gotten. And I just made up my mind right then and there that there's no chance I was going to come to Stanford, because I would have just imploded. There's no way I could have handled that trend. I mean, coming over here to Georgia Tech in the big city of Atlanta was enough for me, and that was an adjustment. Palo Alto, I think, would have been just too much. So they did a great job recruiting, but unfortunately for Stanford, I left there on that flight the next day, knowing that I wouldn't go to Stanford. And so I like Georgia Tech. They had a good, strong academic program. Puggy had a great reputation as a coach. They had David Duval. He was the number 1 player in college golf at the time. A great opportunity for me to, as Puggy would say, jump in Duval's back pocket and learn a thing or two, which I did.
You did. Speaking, you did cross paths with Stanford again. I remember coming over with Chris and a bunch of us when Stanford came for the exhibition match at Druid Hills. And if my memory serves me correct, you whipped that young Tiger Woods that day.
Yeah, yeah, that was fun. That was definitely a highlight in my college time. And that doesn't really happen anymore. The situation was like this. Stanford had traveled from Palo Alto all the way back to Georgia to play in our tournament, Georgia Tech's tournament, which we hosted up in Dalton at a place called the Farm. In fact, I got my Farm shirt on today. Look at that.
Yeah.
So, it's not from 1996 or 1995, by the way. This is actually
Thankfully.
I think it's a 2016 model. So just for the travel and to adjust to the time and all that stuff, they flew in early, and our coach said, "Well, hey, why don't you guys come in and fly in a day earlier? We'll play a match, and we'll go head to head. Number 5, number 4, number 3, number 2, number 1s are going to play each other, and we'll just do it at Druid Hills, and we'll invite the members and whoever wants to come out, and it'll just be kind of like a good exhibition for both of our programs." And I don't think Puggy was completely surprised to hear that Tiger Woods was going to make the trip, and so that was probably part of the planning, that we wanted to showcase some of that Tiger Woods star power, because I think Tiger Woods by this time had already won 3 U.S. juniors in a row and then 1 or 2 U.S. amateurs in a row. So everybody was like, Tiger Woods is probably like a top 4 star in golf, even among all the pros at this time. And he had been I want to say it was his first year at Stanford. I don't remember, but I got paired with him, and he had never played the course. I mean, I had an advantage because that was our home course. Of course, I'd played there a lot, and I did try my best to kind of like, honest to goodness, tell him what I think he should do on the shots and some of the blind holes and whatnot, and I played with him. So I know, yeah, he's a long hitter, but I knew what you should do. And I tried to give him advice, but he didn't really want to take a lot of it. He wanted to just hit drivers and go for the green and all that stuff. And he ended up losing. I played pretty well, and I beat him in the match. And people still talk about that all the time. I mean, I get that. I get that on a weekly basis. Someone will come up and say, I was there that day. That's cool. It was a really cool thing. I don't think that happens in college golf very much anymore.
Yeah.
What I remember, I think you shot 66. I might be wrong, but it was 66,
right.
67. And but at the end of the match, Wally handed out autographed team pictures from Stanford with Tiger, Noda, Casey Martin, and the other 2 guys, which I still have mine framed.
Yeah.
I thought about selling it on eBay, but the autographs have kind of faded. But
Well,
it was interesting to see that. But college golf has changed so much. Junior golf has changed so much since you were a junior player. I mean, now you can't go anywhere without there's a junior tournament, AJGA, Southern Golf, whatever. But it wasn't that way for you. You had to. The Future Masters was obviously a big tournament. I'm not sure how many other big tournaments really that were out there at that time for you.
Back then, the AJGA was in its fledgling stages. Like there was probably 25 AJGA events on the calendar. Some of those were during the school year. I played. You can't really do a lot of traveling in the school year. I mean, it's just not feasible. So I did play in one. I remember my senior year, I went to Houston in March for like a spring break or something, and played in an AJGA tournament. And when I came back, my first high school match, the coach on the other team asked me about the tournament, and I was like, it was okay, it was great. And he said, "Well, you're ineligible to play in this match." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Yeah, your season's going on right now, and if you play in another event outside of your team, you're ineligible for the rest of the season." So sure enough,
Right.
choosing to play in that tournament, I missed my entire. I think it was my senior year.
It was
Ineligibility.
I remember because it's pretty controversial, and
yeah. Well, it was dumb of me to choose to play in a tournament and not even think about that. I mean, but to be honest, where I was in golf in my life at that point, I believe I'd already committed to Georgia Tech. High school golf just didn't hold like a real high priority, and we're playing up at the old McFarland golf course on the temporary greens. It was about, every hole was about 190-yard par four. The cups were like this big around because they never changed them, starting in November. So it wasn't really like that I had missed out on it was a social thing.
Yeah.
I had fun playing with the guys on the team, and the trip to the beach at the end of the year, if we qualified for state, that was great. I missed that. But now going back to the AJGA, the calendar was made up more of these one-off regional events. Like the Future Masters is the greatest example. There's a lot of smaller examples. There was a big tournament in Selma called the Dixie Junior. Chris, I don't know if you ever played in that, but there was
I
a
did.
big tournament there. And then there was a tournament in Memphis called the Bubba Conley that a lot of people played in. I never played in that one, but a lot of kids played in that. But they attracted kind of a regional and to a certain extent national crowd. You'd occasionally get a kid from California, and that was like, whoa, California. He must be really good. And then you find out like he's a human being like everybody else and shoots 77.
Mm-hmm.
But that was kind of what the landscape looked like. And then I think in the time between then and now, all these years have passed. I think AJGA now probably has like 5 or 6 tournaments every single week, starting like March to Thanksgiving. And you can play, but I still think you can't play more than 5. That was one of the original rules in the AJGA, is that you can only play in 5 tournaments. You can't just load the box and play all their tournaments. You can play in 5. And I think that's still the rule. The kids can't play more than 5 because there's just more kids.
Yeah. So how did you get recruited by Stanford and Auburn? Mike probably saw you at the state junior.
Yeah.
But how did you name get out there?
I think it was just a combination of some AJGA success I had and tournaments like the Future Masters. You couldn't just Google and figure out what a player is doing or anything like that. Back then, you had to read the publications and see like what names continue to pop up. And I had a couple of pretty good finishes. I won a match play event when I was 16 in Tampa, an AJGA event, like one of their majors. Beat some of the like Justin Leonard, Trip Keeney on my way to winning that. And I think that was probably me landing on the sort of the radar of coaches like Wally Goodwin from Stanford and Mike Holder from Oklahoma State and those kind of guys, like the kind of coaches that you just hoped would even like glance in your direction at some point. Yeah. I started getting letters and phone calls, probably not. I don't even remember, but definitely letters, like communication in the mail, like, hi, we've been following your career, and as you progress, we'd like you to consider Oklahoma State University as your college golf, stuff like that. So I just think it would happen because I had some wins, and I didn't play that much, but when I did play, I finished pretty high. And they also could, once they knew your name, they could track you in other tournaments like the Alabama State Am, and just to see that, like, oh, there's a 64 by that kid's name. You don't see that often from a 16-year-old. So I think that was it. And also, I was an easy kid to recruit because I was a 4.0 student coming out of high school, and I didn't represent like an academic risk for any school. I just think that it was easy to look my direction. And basically in my year, it was Chris Couch and me who were kind of like both vying for these scholarships, and scholarships were being limited more and more at the time. So I remember I had a recruiting trip to Florida scheduled, and 2 days before I was leaving, the coach called and said, "You can cancel your trip. Chris Couch just committed. He's getting full ride." So they had no scholarship money for me. So I was like, all right, I'm free this week.
Yeah.
And that was kind of how it went back then.
How many times did you win the Future Masters?
I won that 2 times. I won that my last 2 years. One time over Chris Couch in a playoff, and one time over Brian Gay in sort of a one-shot win.
2 Florida guys.
2 Florida guys, yeah. And then they turned around and beat my butt in the when they won the NCAA championships at Kentucky my sophomore year. I was playing, and those 2 guys were both in the tournament, and their team beat us by 1 to win it all.
When you see Brian or Chris, do you throw it out there that you beat them in the Future Masters, and then they come back at you and well, we whipped you in the NCAAs?
Brian Gay has the ultimate comeback to me every time, because one of the first times I ever played with, well, actually, it was the first time I ever played with Brian Gay. We were in a tournament when I was, I think, 10 and he was 11 at Decatur Country Club. And I had a 2-shot lead with a few holes to play. He makes a hole in one on a par three, and I make a bogey. So I went from 2 ahead to 1 down, and I lost by 1. So we can go back as far as we want to, but in the end of the day, Brian Gay has the upper hand because he made an ace to beat me when I was 10.
Wow.
That's great.
Wow.
We go back a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you look back on those days as a junior golfer at Florence Country Club, what kind of emotions does it bring out in you? I mean,
Mm.
obviously it shaped a little bit of who you are now.
It definitely did. The biggest thing is like what golf instills in you as your character and your integrity. That's just the biggest thing that I believe. Just chasing that ball and trying to shoot a score, and honestly, try to improve a little bit every day. I don't know who taught me that or if anybody did, but I really think just the whole environment of Florence Country Club kind of taught me that.
Mm.
That was the way you practiced there. You played golf. You just went out there and played and tried to, in my case anyway, if I shot 68, the next day I was like, I shot 68 yesterday. Today I'm going to try to shoot 67. And how can I do that? Try to figure out how to shave something off, and just try to figure it out. There was not always a tangible answer, but that pursuit of just trying to be the best I can be and a little bit better than yesterday was what has shaped me until today. I mean, it literally, as soon as we finish here, I've got another quick call, and then I'm going out to try to get a little bit better than I was yesterday. And I've been doing that since I was 8 years old at
Yeah.
Florence Country Club, and it's shaped the way I pursue the game of golf. I'm just so fortunate and blessed that golf has been in my life to give me a concrete thing to pursue that it's really unmasterable.
Mm.
And that's where it started for me.
That's great.
When you look back, I mean, obviously you're standing there on the putting green at Florence Country Club and you're 12 or 13 and you're, okay, this putt's to win the Masters, this putt's to win the U.S. Open. But was there a moment in those younger days or even in college when you said, I think I can make a go of this and make it on the PGA Tour?
Never.
Right.
There never was that moment. I did do a lot of those. This putt's to win. This is to beat Jack Nicklaus. This is to beat Tom Watson. All that. I did a lot of that, but I never thought ahead like the PGA Tour or bust mentality. I think maybe part of that was the environment around town and around my family was a little suppressive. Like nobody really makes it in golf. It just doesn't really happen. So let's plan for. It's great you're getting good at golf, but let's plan in reality over here. So I think that environment kind of existed. The members at Florence Country Club were behind me, and Chris Burns was behind me. I think they believed in me. Chris probably saw something in me. The members, I think, naively believed that I was going to be the local kid who could make it. I don't think they really knew much, but I never saw it that way. I just I wanted to get myself a scholarship to go to college and get a good degree somewhere, and that's why I was looking at schools like Stanford and Georgia Tech. And so once that happened, I kind of had to reassess and be like, all right, well, now what? I'm in college now. I was watching these guys at Turtle Point, these kind of players that I'm about to be playing. Can I be as good as them? And I always kind of felt like a little bit of the underdog every new level. And then before too long in college, I was like not the underdog anymore. I was the top dog by the time I graduated. And then it was time to turn pro. And Lisa and I had got married in college, and our son was born, Connor, our first son. So I had an almost 2-year-old kid turn pro. I was like not the typical college graduate. And all of a sudden I feel again like I'm an underdog. I'm watching these guys on the Nike tour that I play with, like, man, they shoot like so low, and these guys are just like, how can I ever get there? And then before long, top dog in that league. So I just I never saw ahead. I just saw like the next day, and I saw like, what have I learned today from these players I'm playing against? I did jump into David Duval's back pocket and learn from him. I learned from all the guys I watched on the Corn Ferry tour, and they just you think you play a lot of tournaments in college. You play like 13 in 1 year. And I think that first year I played 39. So there's a learning curve there. But even when I got onto the PGA Tour, I remember sitting at lunch with guys like Curtis Strange and Hale Irwin and Tom Lehman, and all these guys are my friends now, but sitting there just trying to pick up a little something about like the way they go about their day and the way they attack holes and the way they shoot their scores. And even now that I've been on the tour for going on 30 years, I sit with young guys and try to get a little bit about like what is really, what's Akshay Bhatia? What's his approach to the game? You know, he's like 14 years old. What are these young kids doing? Because in a way, like, even though I'm on the same league, it's kind of like a different league because they've learned to play differently from their earliest roots than I did. And I've had to be pretty good at making the transition. Like I consider myself to be a new school kind of player. And most people are surprised when they hear that, but I'm not old school. I'm not old school at all. I'm a new school kind of player. I play by the stats. I'm a TrackMan guy. I have switched over fully and adapted to the new way of attacking this game of golf. Just that comes from like just watching and learning. And you know, I used to try to do what Curtis Strange did. Now I'm trying to do what Akshay Bhatia does.
Yeah.
You have to, because I didn't grow up with a TrackMan. I didn't grow up, you know, knowing my numbers and all that stuff. I just grew up with a 150-yard bush.
Yep.
And
That's funny, but it's
now
true.
I know that the way the golf course is set up and the way the players play and the equipment is set up, you just have to be like really on top of your numbers and stuff. It's a basic requirement for being a good golfer. And I've switched over and I'm proud of that. But that's just the way I've seen it, is like, I got to adapt every day. Even if it's slow, I got to keep on adapting and keep on trying to get a little bit better every day. And in the end, really, I kind of hope to one day be successful at golf. Like, I don't see all this as being like a success thing. I just see it being like I'm pursuing something. And one day maybe I hope to get to the really close to the checkered flag.
That's pretty good.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, Stewart, thanks again. Good luck the rest of the year.
All right. Appreciate it, y'all.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Good to see you.
Mm-hmm.